Hello, friends. 20th July 1969, the lunar module of the Apollo 11 mission landed on the moon. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were in it. After the landing, Neil Armstrong tried to open the door to get down on the moon. It wasn't easy opening this door due to high pressure, but he successfully opened it after a little struggle. Then he tried to get down to the moon in his heavy spacesuit. The exit wasn't spacious, so by mistake, he hit the top, and a piece of the lunar module broke off. Neither of them was aware of this because of the lack of air. The sound didn't travel. They didn't hear any sound. But this broken piece was very crucial. It was the ascent engine arming switch. Without this switch, their lunar module couldn't take off again, and they couldn't return to Earth. Unaware of this, Neil Armstrong got out and stepped on the moon's surface. He became the first man to step on the moon. Many people refused to believe that humans had gone to the moon. People cook up theories of their own to claim that the entire Apollo 11 mission was a farce put up by America, that they filmed the scenes on Earth and lied to the world. How else do you explain the flag fluttering without air? What's the truth to it? Come, let's try to understand this story in today's video.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Houston, we see you on a stereo, over. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The Apollo 11 mission was a war. Specifically speaking, the Cold War, fought between America and the Soviet Union. Both countries were engaged in a space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union became the first country to launch the first artificial satellite. It was named Sputnik, and it was the first man-made object to be placed in Earth's orbit. The American government was shocked to see the Soviets getting ahead. Months later, in 1958, America launched their satellite as well. But 3 years later, in 1961, America got another shock. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was the first person to go to space. The Soviets beat America once again. 1 week later, the then President of America, John F. Kennedy, wrote a letter to the Vice President dated 20th April 1961. He asked the Vice President how they could beat the Soviet Union. By putting a laboratory in space or by a trip around the moon? Are we working 24 hours a day on existing programs? If not, why not? Are we making the maximum effort? Asking if there was another space program that could be achieved quickly, that would produce dramatic results and give them a lead in the race. He got the answer some days later, because he soon realized that the next big step would be to send humans to the moon. On 25th May 1961, in his famous speech, he promised the world that he would send humans to the moon before the end of the decade. Not only this, he also promised to get the humans back on Earth safely.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
For many, this was an unbelievable announcement. Friends, imagine 1961. There were no smartphones, no internet. There wasn't even GPS technology. The computers were so slow and old in such times, he was promising to send humans to the moon. For this, over the next 5 years, he provided $9 billion in additional funding to the space program. The entire space agency was engaged in fulfilling this one aim. Mere months later, the tests began. First, they tested the rockets that would be used to leave the Earth. Then the heat shields of the command modules were tested, how much they'd be able to resist heat. Then the propulsion system of the service module. Between 1963 to 1967, many unmanned tests were carried out. The rockets didn't carry any humans during the tests. In February 1967, they planned the first manned tests, a test in which astronauts will go up to space in the rockets. This was the Apollo 1 mission. But during the tests on Earth, on 27th of January 1967, the cabin caught on fire, and the 3 astronauts preparing to go to space died in the fire. After this painful event, NASA didn't lose courage. Instead, it continued further testing. Apollo 4, Apollo 5, and Apollo 6 were all unmanned missions for further testing. In October 1968, Apollo 7 mission was launched, and once again they attempted to send humans to space. This was successful. Only 2 months later, in December 1968, Apollo 8 mission was launched, in which 3 astronauts were sent near the moon. 3 months later, in March 1969, Apollo 9 mission was launched. In this, the lunar module was tested, the part of the spacecraft that was actually going to land on the moon. And 2 months after that, in May 1969, was the Apollo 10 mission. In this mission, 3 astronauts had to do almost everything for practice that was supposed to be done in Apollo 11 mission, except actually landing on the moon. Look at the speed with which NASA was launching the missions one after the other. In the gap of 2 to 3 months, a new mission to test the next thing. Testing the rockets, spacecraft, going to the moon, and after all these tests, finally, on 16th of July 1969, Apollo 11 mission was launched.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
3 astronauts were a part of this mission. 38-year-old Commander Neil Armstrong, he led this mission. The pilot of the command module, Michael Collins, and the pilot of the lunar module, Edwin Buzz Aldrin. These 3 names are inscribed in the pages of history. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin become famous names, everyone knows them today. But Michael Collins isn't very popular. The reason for this is very interesting, I'll tell you later in this video. The spacecraft of this Apollo 11 mission had 3 main parts: the command module, service module, and the lunar module. The first 2 are collectively known as CSM, Command and Service Module. They aim to detach the lunar module and have it land on the moon, and to return, the lunar module would have to be relaunched and attached to the CSM to enable the astronauts to return to Earth. To launch this spacecraft, a Saturn V5 rocket was to be used. Before the launch, the rocket was loaded with 1 million gallon of kerosene, liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen. The weight of this rocket was 3 million kg. With its help, the spacecraft reached Earth's orbit. It took less than 10 minutes to reach the orbit. Then they made about 1.5 revolutions around the Earth, after which they were given the permission from the mission control. The mission control was, of course, based on Earth. They communicated their permission to begin translunar injection, i.e., taking the spacecraft out of Earth's orbit and towards Moon's orbit. To leave Earth's orbit, the Saturn V5 rocket was used. This was the 3rd stage for the rocket. These events took place within 5 hours of the launch. But to actually reach the moon took several days. Astronauts waited in the spacecraft, the AT, slept, and took pictures of themselves and their surroundings. 19th July 1969. After traveling for almost 400,000 kilometers, the Apollo 11 spacecraft reached Moon's orbit. Here, it was supposed to be split into 2. The command and service module separated from the lunar module. Michael Collins was in the command module. This part of the spacecraft was nicknamed Columbia, and the lunar module was nicknamed the Eagle. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were in it. The thing is that the command and service module was tasked to remain in the moon's orbit. Only the lunar module was going to land on the moon. It meant that only Armstrong and Aldrin had the chance to step on the moon, and not Michael Collins. Perhaps this is the reason why not many people know Michael Collins. Even though he was a part of the Apollo mission, he did not step on the moon. But even so, Michael Collins' part in this mission was perhaps the most important, because the lunar module was supposed to be reattached to the CSM. Without Michael Collins, Armstrong and Aldrin could not have returned safely. Around 8 p.m., the lunar module was going to land on the moon, Exactly at 8:10 p.m., alarms went off. 12:01 and 12:02 alarms.
1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin knew the meaning of this alarm. They asked the Mission Control what they ought to do next. Mission Control tells them to ignore it and keep going.
We're go. Same tide. We're go.
Later, they figured out that 12:02 was a warning. The processing system of the guidance computer of the Apollo was overloaded. But thankfully, the computer was designed in a way that the essential programs which were critical for the mission would continue despite being overloaded. The computer was installed with the program for automatic landing. This would automatically land the lunar module on Moon's surface. But at the height of 150 meters, Neil Armstrong took over the control. He noticed that the lunar module was going to land at a place where huge boulders were strewn about. The landing spot was changed then, and they decided on another spot 4 miles from the predetermined landing spot for the actual landing. At 8:16 p.m., Buzz Aldrin checked the fuel indicator. Only 5% fuel remained.
3.5 down. 9 forward. 5%. How many bites?
Seeing the low level of fuel, the Mission Control initiated a countdown. The countdown to decide whether they should land or abort the mission. Now we're at critical fuel state, and that's why the 60-second call is given, and then the 30-second call. Finally, literally at the last minute, with only 30 seconds remaining in this countdown, Neil Armstrong sent a radio message to Earth. What he said was not only fascinating, but left the entire world in awe. To discover the profound words he shared and unravel the mystery, join me in the second part. Stay tuned for an exploration into Armstrong's message and the incredible events that followed. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I can't wait to continue the adventure with you in the second part. Stay tuned for more exciting content, and I look forward to meeting you there.